I'm Greg Giuliano. I'm an executive coach, organizational change consultant, and author. I believe leaders have the power to shape the future and change people's lives. I also believe people who challenge the status quo and go beyond usual and ordinary are rare. They're willing to go to the edge and push farther, over and over again. When I find these ultra leaders, I love to talk with them. In each episode, I talk with ultra leaders to learn how they do what they do and how they keep growing as leaders. I promise you a full dose of ultra leadership from other ultra leaders just like you in every conversation. We're at the edge of another episode. Let's jump in. Welcome to another episode of Ultra Leadership. Our guest today is Ramneek Gupta. Ramneek is the founder and managing partner of PruVen Capital, an independent venture firm created in partnership with Prudential Financial as the single limited partner. Ramneek brings a unique experience based from his past as a traditional venture investor, early startup employee, and a corporate venture investor to the mission of creating an investment platform that's designed to generate both financial and strategic value for its stakeholders. I interpret that as Ramneek is a guy who knows how to create value as an investor, as a leader, and as a team member. Before founding PruVen, Ramneek was a co-founder of the venture investing efforts at Citi. And at Citi Ventures, he led all aspects of that platform's build out, including definition of the focus areas, hiring and development of the team, global expansion into Asia. He's led investments in over 25 companies across fintech, eco-commerce, payments, digital customer experience, digital servicing, enterprise IT, representing over $180 billion in market value. You would recognize some of his notable investments, including Square, Jet.com, DocuSign, Honey, Grab, and others. So it could take me 20 minutes to read his accomplishments and all of his bio, but I want to jump into the conversation and say, welcome, Ramneek.
Thank you so much, Greg. Really excited to be on this podcast with you.
Thank you. Hey, I'd like to start out and give the listeners a win right out of the gate. So tell me, what book are you recommending to people these days?
Very good question, Greg. In general, I am more of a short form type of content consumption model rather than books, and generally am more partial to podcasts and TED videos rather than books. So if you're okay, I might suggest the ones that have really stuck with me off late. This podcast on GPT-3 from A16Z podcast, network was a very valuable one that helped me really understand what was going on there that I highly recommend. Another one that I recently came across was the one around token gated commerce from the Not Boring podcast network that I thought was also very interesting in the future of commerce and how identity and commerce sort of merge together and the value of the decentralized networks, etc., around that. So those two are things that I've been listening to off late that really opened my mind a little bit more than what I already knew about those sort of areas.
Awesome. Thanks. So when I look at your bio and in the conversations that you and I've had, I really pull out, you have a tremendous ability to set a vision for an organization, build the team that can really drive growth. So that work of aligning people and building the bench strength and getting stuff done, that's really the nuts and bolts of leadership. And so as a leader, everybody's always talking about us, right? So if you're a leader, people are talking about you and how they experience you as a leader. So how would you describe yourself as a leader?
The first sort of sentence or term that comes to mind when I think about that question is servant leadership is the model that I think about, Greg. And what that means to me is leading from the front and from within the trenches. So rolling up your sleeves, getting into the trenches, not expecting anything out of your team that you are not willing to or capable of doing. So that's the first principle that comes to my mind when I think about leadership for myself. The other one that I've espoused extensively is what I like to call most things that are worthwhile in life and significant in life are neither due to nature nor nurture. It's really practice. And I think you have to, everything, that 10,000 hour concept, you have to really practice, practice, practice before you get good at anything. And that's something that I believe in thoroughly. And it's another key pillar for me when it comes to leadership principles. And the third one is, as Ben Horowitz famously put it, what you do is who you are. And to me, it's the authenticity part of it. You can't fake it. You have to, whatever you do is really how you're going to get perceived, not whatever you say. And so being authentic is critical. And that's the third piece. And then the fourth one, if on the how side of leadership, I've always tried to make sure there aren't too many hierarchies. And the goal with that is, as Elon Musk famously said, information needs to travel through the fastest route, not the right route. And so setting up an organization in such a way that that is truly possible. Those are the kinds of things that I've focused on as I continue to practice the art of being a leader.
Yeah, so I'm curious about the practice piece around that, because leading by example and showing up authentically, facilitating really powerful and direct and easy communication. How do you help the folks who work with you, and how do you yourself, practice being better at what you have to do?
Yeah. I think the first thing that is necessary in that journey, if we are with your team, is to clarify to them that nobody has all the answers, certainly not you, certainly not them. So it is okay to be comfortable with the fact that we don't know the end game. We know the direction, we know the principles that we stand for, but we do not know how to get to the true north that we're all shooting for. And we will figure it out. And that's what I mean by practice. You have to have that safety, that commonality of understanding between you and your team, that none of this is known a priori other than the framework and the principles. So let's just focus on those and then execute practice on a regular basis, is how I think about that.
That's terrific advice. So let's go in the complete opposite direction. What's the worst leadership advice you have ever heard someone give?
I think we'll be here till the evening if we truly try to tackle this question. But at a high level, for me, any leadership advice that is sort of generic without the specific context of the situation, of the people who are sharing that advice and where that's relevant, is bad advice, right? So that's my lens onto your question there. One specific thing I can touch upon is this thing that I've always oftentimes heard, certainly in the tech ecosystem: fake it till you make it. That's okay in some contexts. That's okay in certain sort of functions. But generally, I think you have to be fairly transparent and authentic with your teams, and everyone can see through if you're sort of faking it when as a leader. So I've never really been able to, maybe certain contexts, certain situations, maybe, but as a generic advice, I think that's a wrong interpretation. The right interpretation is, let's set the conditions such that everyone understands we may not have all the answers, but we will work on it together. I am with you together in the trenches, and we will get there. And these are the principles that we will follow to get there, right? That is the right way to think about that.
Absolutely, right? So it's a really, that fake it till you make it is a really inartful, if that's a word, way of saying that we can't wait for certainty, right? Certainty is a luxury, especially as a leader. You don't have certainty all the time. So you have to be able to make decisions with uncertain, like we exist in uncertainty. So trusting yourself to make those best decisions when you don't have all the pieces, and you have to keep moving.
That's right, Greg. And that's the right interpretation of it. But most of the time we get into a lot of trouble because most people interpret that incorrectly, right? Most people interpret it as, let's take shortcuts, it's okay. Most people, right. So that's where that one jumped, on my radar screen when you asked that question, because it feels like it is the right advice, but without the right context, it generally gets interpreted or absorbed or followed in the wrong way. And that's why I put it in the bucket of worst advice without context.
Yeah. It's just a bad shortcut. I love it. So you're a lifelong learner. I know that. And so when you think about the last year, the last 6 months, what have you learned in your work and in your interactions with people? And maybe what surprised you in the past 6 months or year?
Yeah. What has been a very fun and pleasant sort of a journey over the last 6 or 8 months, or majority of 2022, has been how quickly your team start to change direction and move in a different direction that's more relevant to the current sort of environment and situation, if they have the trust with you, if you build the equity with them, if you have that authentic sort of relationship. When you try to change directions rapidly, I thought it'd be much harder, given the current macro all of us are in. We've all had to adjust very rapidly on what we do and what we do not do. And I was pleasantly surprised on how quickly we were able to get that going in the right direction from everyone on the team. I thought it would be much harder and it'd take much longer. So that's been a very pleasant surprise in the last sort of 6, 8 months for me.
Mm-hmm. So you meet a lot of younger leaders, folks just starting out, maybe they're taking on a team or they're stepping into a leadership role in a startup. They're really great. They were a fantastic engineer or a fantastic, fill in the blank, and now they have to lead a team. And so and this probably it's going to be just a repeat of something we've already talked about, but what's the advice that you share to folks who are, stepping into that for the first time?
Yeah. That's a very good question. And I've benefited from having good advice on that from others that paved the path before me. So I'd like to just share work for me in the early days on this one is I love the Jeff Bezos framework of one-way versus two-way decisions, right? Two-way door decisions. What that means is some set of things are okay to make quick decisions on with whatever information you have, and then iterate very rapidly if those are not the right outcomes or the right results you're looking for. And certain things you have to be very, very deliberate about. And as a leader, as a young leader, getting to understand how to segment the various things you have to do, various decisions you got to make between one way or two way buckets is very critical. And once you understand how to do that, life becomes much more easier. You will be through, as a leader, you have to make 10 decisions every 2 hours, right? Which ones of them you can make quickly based on the data you have, and it's okay to make quickly, which ones you need to be very deliberate about, etc., is a critical sort of skill one needs to develop. And that's my advice to young leaders. And the other thing I would say on this aspect is that this is not a constant. The same activity, the same decision actually could be one way at one point in your journey and two way at another point in your journey. Meaning, let's take hiring, for example. When you're building the core team, the core nucleus of your organization, it is a one way decision. You cannot change the trajectory of your group if and probability of success if you've hired incorrectly in the early days. However, as your team grows and there is the base culture in place and the base infrastructure in place, you get the luxury and the buffer to move quickly on some of those decisions. And if it's not going the way you wanted it to be, you can change that, right? So certain decisions like hiring and building a team, oftentimes as time passes, as your organization changes in scale, size, sophistication, also change from being one way to two way decisions. And knowing that, understanding that is critical. So having always a model of figuring out which is one way, which is a two way decision, and then acting appropriately and for the stage that your organization is very powerful skill to build early on.
So you're responsible for the way the team performs. So when you look at teams, what's the behavior or practice that if everybody did it, the team's performance would elevate?
I think there's probably a thousand things that can be put on that list, but maybe I'll try to select a couple. One that I've always sort of found is I try to encapsulate it in the following way: be here and now, and always say yes and how. Right? If you can now, you can't do that every time. You can't get there, with everyone. But if that's the general sort of way you and your team approach things, I think in general you will be moving much farther ahead, and maybe mostly one step backward, two steps forward, as opposed to two steps backward, one step forward relative to other teams. So that's one that I've always been very focused on, which is whatever you're doing, give your full attention to as a team. Don't be distracted. Don't be sort of showing up without all of your passion and attention into that, and have this approach of saying, yes, let's figure out how, as opposed to no, not can't be done, etc., etc. Yeah, challenge things, but always from the perspective of how can we get this done. And I think one example I'll share here is I used to hear about, if you're in a large company and if you're trying to do something different, compliance, control, legal functions are usually very hard to deal with, and they're usually in the no bucket rather than yes and how bucket. But if you sort of practice this approach, if you engage with them in that context, I was always very lucky to have counterparts on those sides who were also and it's very what's the term, infectious in a good way, meaning if you approach things like that, your counterparties and your partners also start to go about doing things that way. So I found that to be a very positive way to think about a behavior that a team should practice. Coming back to our original point of practice, none of this is nature or nurture. You might be built a certain way or you might be brought up a certain way, but it's really what you practice that ultimately becomes your traditional, your root behavior.
Yeah, and I love it. So those two things really go together, right? So being here now, it's like being really present, not in the past, worried, thinking about something, not projecting into the future, but being really present in order to be really curious. So instead of just listening to what somebody says and then shooting it down, saying, no, that won't work or not, right? So, and then they're getting into a debate, being able to be really present and drop into really generative dialogue where, okay, yeah, let's look at that. And that level of curiosity can't happen if I'm not really present, right?
100%. 100%.
I love that. I love that. Now I'm going to put you on the hot seat a little bit. So all the leaders that I work with, I work with fantastic leaders. I'm really grateful for that. And as successful as we all are, we all do something that we get in our own way. And so I'm curious, as successful and awesome as you are, how do you sometimes get in your own way?
Very good question, Greg. One thing that I've always, shall we say, an area that I'm always trying to work on is delegation. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit against my core sort of being or personality of being very into the weeds at the same time as I am sort of, at 30,000 foot. So I tend to operate at both levels and reasonably well. I think there was some sort of a test that is out there to figure out what kind of personality you are. And that's where I came out at. And it's not surprising at all to me that that's where I came out at. So I tend to operate at both those levels. And the dark side of that is you tend not to be very good at delegation generally, right? So you have to work on that as a result. So it is the sort of the thing that I've mostly focused on or need to, and continuously learning how to do that better, is just delegating and getting out of the minutia, even though I generally am good at it and I like to do it, but finding a way to stay out of it and add more value to where you really are going to make the most impact. So it is hard for somebody with a personality type like myself, but it is also very critical to do it well. And generally, I think it helps. It does get in my way of being scalable and focusing on the more important things.
You just took the words out of my mouth, right? You can't scale that, right? And you're not alone in this, by the way. So, so many, successful leaders, you get to where you are because you're awesome at solving problems. You're awesome at figuring things out. You're great at making decisions, and you like that. Yeah. And so why would you, come to me, keep coming to me. Let me, solve that problem for you. But then everybody gets addicted to Ramneek's the problem solver. And what do they do when you're not around? So I love that you have that self-awareness and you are not alone in trying to figure that out on a daily basis, I would imagine.
Thank you.
So what are you grateful for today?
A very, very long list. That time of the year as well, when we all tend to take stocks. A very apt question there, Greg. Where do I even start? Like, for starters, for me, just the genetic lottery that I happen to being born into, parents who were highly educated, but in the middle class in late 70s. And all of that is very important, right? What that meant is we had enough adversities and constraints that, put in the fire to make something of yourself. And yet not so constraining that you could not achieve what you wanted to, right? So it was sort of a perfect balance. If I had been born, call it 20, 30 years before that in a very young India, it would be mostly constraints and you never could achieve your full potential. And if it was a little bit later, things became way too easy as well. And you could, you lost on the fire. So I felt like I had this Goldilocks zone of being born into the right time to the right sort of middle class, highly educated kind of families that focused on the right thing, that help put the foundations in place. And then ever grateful and thankful for having access to one of the best education systems anywhere in the world. The largest of the Indian government. I've essentially from kinder through college, I've just had a free education all my life. Starting at the school system all the way to the IITs in India. And that's something that I just can't believe I just had access to that, and for no cost, or basically only on merit, right? That was the driving principle there. And then as I was making a big change and a decision to come to the US for grad school, making the decision to come to Stanford forever changed the course of my little journey. So that was something that I was very thankful for, having that opportunity and making that decision that brought me to the Bay Area and Silicon Valley in the center of it all, as far as I'm concerned. And, finally, where I am currently in my journey, the leadership team at my limited partner for our firm, Prudential Financial, and how they've taken a massive leap of faith in helping me create this platform at PruVen Capital that is uniquely driven to be best of both worlds. It's neither traditional corporate strategic investing platform, and it's neither traditional venture platform. It embodies the best of both in terms of structure, being completely independent venture firm, coupled with the ability to distinguish and differentiate yourself and add very unique value to your startup founders by leveraging the depth domain distribution of a large incumbent, or incumbents as in soon to be in fund two, to help your founders. So that unique model was a leap of faith the leadership at Prudential Financial took on me and with me, which I'm going to be forever grateful for as well. So the list can go on, Greg, but hopefully those were, I think, some of the high impact points in the journey of my life, at least.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. I always like to end the meetings, my conversations with folks and the meetings that I facilitate with leaders and teams, with an expression of gratitude. What are we grateful for? Because it makes us feel better, right? It just fires up all those good neurotransmitters in our head. So we're going to leave it there. I am grateful for you. I'm grateful for the time that we've shared today and our conversation. And so thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Likewise, Greg, really appreciate the opportunity and for you to think of me as worthy enough to come share some of my learnings and journey, and really appreciate that opportunity.
Absolutely. You are an ultra leader, my friend. So thank you, Ramneek Gupta. Until next time, remember, managers run the present, ultra leaders shape the future, change lives, and drive better results. If you're enjoying Ultra Leadership, please take a minute and give us a review wherever you find your podcasts. And please stay in touch. Sign up for our Ultra Leadership newsletter at ultraleadership.com. Now, before you jump to your next meeting, I invite you to reflect on what you heard today. What stood out for you? What insight might you want to incorporate into your leadership practice? Until next time, remember, as a leader, you always have the power to shape the future and change lives. So go to the edge and push farther. Thanks for listening.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.